Welcome to the kingdom. I'm Chris, and this is Good Enough Gaming. Howdy folks, and welcome to this video where I'm going to show you how to quickly and easily paint up an entire table's worth of terrain. So I got this terrain here. It's designed by Printable Scenery and printed up by the Mini Wargaming Forge, and I primed it black. Now you can see there, as I just pointed out, because of all the little nooks and crannies, I didn't get a solid coat around all of it, but that's okay because we're still going to base coat the entire thing, and we'll fill in all that stuff. So it's not a big deal if the primer didn't 100% cover it. Because there's so much terrain, the key was just to get enough of a primer coat to hold the actual base coat of paint. So you've got yourself your piece here. Now you really only need about 4 colors, some earth tones and some grays. You got to decide what color you want the rocks to be, what color you want the pillars to be. And I tried to make mine look like the ones that they have on their website. So we're going to go with brownish rocks and gray pillars. Now start off with a dark brown. Doesn't matter what kind of dark brown, it just depends. Do you want the dirt to look a little bit richer, like a very reddish brown, or do you want it to look more like a dusty brown? Me, I wanted a very, very dark brown. So I grabbed one of the darkest browns I had, which happened to be from my Team Yankee paint set, actually. This is US Olive Drab, I think it is, and just slap it on there. Here's where you can fill in the nooks and crannies. Do not worry about getting it on the pillars a little bit. That might actually add some character because ruins and terrain aren't going to have nice, clear lines of color delineation. The point here is you want to give the dirt and the rocks underneath the ruins an earthy appearance. So just go to town. Now we've got to wait for this to dry before we block in the color on the pillars. Now if you're painting a whole bunch of these at once, go down the assembly line, and by the time the last one's done, the first one's dry. But in this case, I had to wait a little bit.
A few moments later.
Now that the brown is dry, or at least mostly dry, I've got somewhere to hold it at least, get yourself a dark gray. Maybe not a black, but certainly not a very, very light gray. You want something mid-tone going to darker. And now we're going to do the exact same thing as the dirt, but we're going to do it over all of the pillars. Now initially when I painted the other pieces in the set, I just primed it gray to begin with and saved myself a step, and it saved a lot of time. However, the rattle can ran out when I had 2 pieces left. I tried, but I couldn't get it all out of there. So instead I had to prime these ones in black and then paint over it in gray. But if you can prime it in gray in the first place, or prime it maybe brown if you want to go with the rocks. But either way, if you can prime one of your base colors, you've just done half the work. In this case, I had to paint them gray. Not a big deal because, again, I'm not going for precision here. We're just trying to lay down a baseline of color. Believe it or not, the hard part's done. The bulk of your work is finished. Now it's just dry brushing the whole thing. So get yourself a mid-tone gray, and despite what you might think, we're actually going to brush this on the rocks. Now you don't have to do this. You could go straight to doing the lighter color of brown, like a beige or a khaki, but when I was doing a test print, I found that if I dry brushed this gray first on the rocks and then did the beige over top, the 2 colors mixed and it gave it much more of a rocky, dusty, earthy look to it, whereas if I went straight with the beige, it looked a little too comic book or cartoony. The colors were too stark, they were too bold, and it just didn't look right. So I found doing this one layer helps to highlight the edges of the stones, and then when I put the beige over top, it looked more natural. So give that a little bit of time to dry, and then bring in any kind of beige or khaki. Again, this is terrain. You don't have to spend the kind of time that you spend on your models. As long as the terrain is colored and has light and shadow, that's really all you need. So dry brushing here, Again, if you get a little bit on the rocks above, that'll actually look natural. Look like the dust is slowly settling on top of the ruins itself. But a heavier dry brush here, so you get kind of a transition between the areas that were dry brushed gray and then the darker brown areas underneath. And if you got a big enough dry brush like the one I have here, it will not take you long at all. Now it's time to dry brush the ruins, the rocks, or the stones of the ruins themselves, so get a lighter gray than the one you used previously. You could use the other, but the stronger the contrast, the nicer the terrain will look. So I got myself a very, very light gray, almost a white, and while it looks like it might be a little too much here, when it dries, it'll calm down a little bit. Right now it almost looks like I'm painting snow on, but when it dries, it tones down a few shades. Brush over the stones, the pillars, the ruins, anything like that. As you can see, that took me about 20 seconds and we're done. Now at this point, you could be finished. You could put that on your table, especially if it's like a desert terrain, and it would look great. But I wanted to add a little bit of color, so we're going to put some grass and flocking on it, just to give it a little bit of a color accent and to make it really sell the effect that they're old ruins. So get yourself an old crappy brush like the one I have here. Every painter, if you've been painting more than a couple months, you got one. Get yourself a can of flock. I went with a more muted green. You can get a very bright forest green, but I tried on one model and it was too much. And get yourself some Elmer's glue or white glue. Some folks might tell you to water it down. I just paint it straight on. So I got a blob there on a tissue paper that I was using for my dry brushing. And then just the wetness of the bristles was all the water that I added. Get a little bit on the brush and then dab it inside the crevices of the rocks. You could put it wherever the heck you want, but go outside and look on your sidewalk. The weeds and the trees are popping up through the cracks and the crevices, not busting through the center of the rocks themselves. So you can try as much as you want. Lots of flocking, just a little. I know the printable scenery models that they put on their website, they cover all of the brown areas in grass. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to have a nice mix of dirt, stone, and grass. So put it down until you're happy with it. And don't rush, but also be quick, because you're putting down thin layers of this glue and it will start to dry if you don't quickly put the flocking on top. So be fast, but be efficient. The final step is to grab a couple pinches of flocking and sprinkle it on top of the model. I did this inside of a shoebox, that way if, all the mess and the sprinkles I got everywhere at the end, I could just dump them back into the container. Also because as you're sprinkling it, obviously you're getting flocking where you haven't put glue, so there is going to be loose flock. So as you see here, once you've got it covered, you're going to want to pick up the model very gently, turn it upside down, and tap on it in order to shake off the extra flock. You'll get most of it, but you won't quite get all of it. So give it a good tapping. You can reuse that stuff that fell off. And when you take a look at it, you'll see some of the flocking, just because of static, has stuck to areas that you didn't paint. That's okay. Wait until it dries completely, and then get a brush and brush off those areas. And it will look exactly how you want it. And there you have it. An entire table worth of terrain. Dry brushed in about 2 evenings is what it took for me to do all of that. The longest part, as I said, was laying down those base colors. As we look over here, you can see there are some areas I haven't painted yet. They're pools, and I ran out of water effect, so I haven't painted those just yet. You can also see where I used some of the lighter or the bolder green flock, and I thought that was a bit too much, but I didn't bother to go back and mess with it. So, try it out, folks. I think you'll find it's good enough.